Hey, what's up? This is Ash Ketchum here. 2019 saw the introduction of the Gore-Tex Air Force 1. Well, they're back this year with a new version, and we happen to have a pair right here. I put this up to Instagram poll, seeing what colour I should pick up, and you guys voted for the black one, so here we are. I preferred the green myself, but that's fine. I'm not mad. These were £130 or $150, making them a fair bit more expensive than your regular Air Force 1, so we hope therefore for some real tangible benefits over and above the regular version, and of course including the all-important test of water resistance and how these hold up in wet weather. So we're going to take a proper deep dive on these and see if they're worth picking up and my overall experiences with them so far. First though, some exciting news. I mentioned in a couple of videos now that I've been wanting to get into jewellery a bit more, experiment with that stuff, and a couple of people suggested VITALY as a potential brand. Well, they actually got in touch with me and not only were able to hook me up with a few cool pieces, but are also very kindly the paid sponsors of this video, which means that yes, you can use yourself code Antwon20 to get yourself 20% off anything that they do. And that includes my choices here. I picked out a couple of things with super clean finishes that feel quite sharp and quite futuristic, but also, since they're very minimal, definitely appeal to a ring novice such as myself. These stacking ones are like $60 for a set of two, so I think a great way to start experimenting with wearing this stuff. I'll be doing exactly that, so you'll probably see some of these things popping up in a few Instagram outfits in the future. So yeah, Antwon20, 20% off. Do have a look and let me know if you see anything cool. Now let's take a look at these Nike Air Force 1 GTXs. The big question, I suppose, is how exactly these compare to the regular version, so we're going to have that in mind as we go through this video. And of course, in quite a few ways, these are the same. The overall silhouette does not change, so we're going to have to look a little bit closer to find those performance and aesthetic differences. And in fact, we're going to start with the real meat of this collab, which is the Gore-Tex lining that you'll find inside the shoe. How is this implemented, and does it actually make these waterproof when combined with the other performance features of the shoe? Looking inside, you'll see this single piece of branded Gore-Tex material wrapping around here, and that's not just on the inside quarter, but underneath the tongue as well, and this even kind of curves underneath the insole a little bit, meaning that this has been made as protective as they can, and minimizing the points of failure by not using any stitching to sew different pieces of material together. Simply put, this layer is designed to prevent water getting into the shoe, whilst allowing water vapor to come out, because waterproofing is only going to get you so far if your feet are getting all sweaty and gross on the inside. This is the primary feature designed to give these water resistance, and there are a few accompanying things which help aid that too. You'll notice the tongue, for example, has been changed compared to the regular version. This is gusseted, which means that it is physically attached to the upper along the length of this tongue. That's going to really help prevent water ingress from the top here. You might also notice the signature Air Force 1 perforations, which you'll usually find over the toe box and on the outside quarter, have been removed, and instead of the all-pleather construction, over these sections in particular, we've instead got the material swapped out with this woven nylon. I believe this is done to help retain some level of breathability on the shoe, whilst allowing them greater protection and hopefully better water resistance. We'll come back to how this paneling detailing affects the overall aesthetics of the shoe, but first, how exactly do these three features combine to create something that's water resistant? Let's take these outside, give them a bit of a spray with a hose in a highly scientific rain test, and find out. I gave these two separate tests. Firstly, a more general spraying over the whole upper to try and give them a bit of an even covering of water. After doing this, gave them a little check on the inside. Obviously, some did go directly inside the shoe. Not much I can do about that with my slightly inaccurate hosing, but checking fully inside the shoe, things did look pretty good. They certainly weren't wet inside, which no doubt would have been the case immediately with a regular pair of Air Force 1s. Following that, I wanted to see that this gusseting is actually doing its job and working, so we went for some more targeted water-based action directly on the top of the upper here over the tongue, and after absolutely soaking the laces, again directly under the tongue, things seemed remarkably dry. Immediately following this, I did then put them on for 5 or 10 minutes to splash around in the water a bit, and upon removing them, my toes and forefoot were dry. More towards the top of my foot, admittedly my socks were a bit wet, but as I say, I think this may have been at least partly due to my inaccurate spraying, getting the inside of the shoe wet directly. And checking back now after maybe an hour and a half after I did this filming, and this was a pretty liberal soaking, and there is a tiny bit of perceptible dampness in the toe box here, but it's honestly not much, and it's certainly much better than what you would expect from a regular non-Gore-Tex lined pair of shoes. So yeah, the main thing they set out to do, I think they achieve. They do a pretty decent job of keeping the inside of the shoe dry. The good news is these performance upgrades don't really seem to affect comfort in any meaningful way. The gusseted tongue, the lack of perforations here, and the extra lining you might think would make these much warmer, but I didn't really notice much difference wearing these. In short, if you've worn Air Force Ones before, you know what the overall experience is going to be like. Considering these are currently, I think, the most expensive Air Force Ones on Nike's website, it would have been good for there to be some kind of tangible, immediate benefit comfort-wise when you put these on. You know, some of these use React soles, for example. You got the John Elliott ones that have extra cushioning in the midsole. Something like that that makes it kind of feel like an elevated version of the Air Force One. As it stands, you won't really notice the difference until you come into wet conditions, but of course, you'll definitely appreciate having these when you do. In fact, the sole is worth mentioning. These use exactly the same midsole and outsole as the regular Air Force Ones, which is not actually the best in terms of grip for wet or slippery conditions. It's certainly something that I've noticed on my downtown Air Force Ones, which use the same outsole. I get that they were trying to keep it as close as possible to the aesthetic and the overall wearing experience of the regular Air Force One, but it would have been nice to just on the outsole have had some kind of upgrade to turn this more into like the ultimate winter sneaker that some people are no doubt looking for. The overall similarity to the standard Air Force One means that in terms of fit and sizing, these are pretty much exactly the same. The lining on the inside does not kind of bulk these out or make them fit differently in any noticeable way. It is a very thin lining. So I bought these in a UK 10.5, which is half a size down to what I would purchase in many Nike sneakers. It's on the basis that your average Air Force One does have a little bit of a roomy fit to it. And they provide a nice secure fit, so no worries there. While these are aesthetically very similar to the regular Air Force One, there are definitely some differences that are worth talking about. Probably most notably is that paneling detail that we talked about earlier. It gives them a bit of an extra dimension and a slight visual difference to the regular ones. For me, part of the charm of the Air Force One is in its material simplicity, in contrast to so many other shoes out there which do use a bunch of different textures. So I'm not crazy about this change, but I do think it was done for performance reasons. But there's something else to note with this panel detailing, and that's that the colours are actually different too. This is more noticeable on the other colours, of course, but it is still present here. You've got black at the front and a slightly darker black at the back. It's a subtle effect that adds a little bit more detail to this shoe. Another change here is the midsole black is again a slightly different colour, both from the upper and from the outsole. So you've got this little bit of slight contrast here that's almost imperceptible. In fact, under very bright light, and the footage here is probably making it more noticeable than it actually is, it actually seems to have a very slight kind of midnight blue tint to it. This isn't super noticeable, but it might put some people off who want something that is 100% one colour, want that real murdered out look. But I think Nike did this because they knew that they had to make these texture changes on the nylon here to keep this shoe kind of comfortable to wear. So they thought, might as well run with it and have these other slight contrasted areas throughout the shoe too. I think it does make the nylon panels look more intentional, gives a more cohesive design overall rather than having these random contrast bits and everything else the same. And it does give you a bit of a visual reason to pick these up and not purely a performance one. That multi-tonal look, of course, much more noticeable on the other colours than it is on the black one, but nonetheless worth noting here too. There's a couple of other updated details too. As is mandatory on Gore-Tex based products, there is of course Gore-Tex branding on this. You'll find this to the outer quarter here on the back. They've used this stitched Gore-Tex logo here. This contrast gives it a lot of visibility, but at least having it a bit further back stops it from fully taking over the shoe, and it does give an immediate difference between the burglar-approved regular triple black Air Force One. I was initially in two minds about the stitched finish here. I associate Gore-Tex with a futuristic, high-tech kind of thing, and the slightly rough-looking lettering on the stitching is kind of at odds with that. However, aesthetically, I think it's more in keeping with the rest of the Air Force One. Note, for example, the stitched Nike Air logo at the back, so it is at least appropriate to have this kind of inclusion here. And comparing this to the 2019 version, which had both filled in text and having it in this kind of high-vis builder orange kind of colour, I think this is a much better version. A sharp printed graphic probably wouldn't have worked as well here. Oh yeah, other difference is the black ones last year used a gum sole, so yes, these are a blacker Air Force One than before. The other logo-based change is the dual branding on the tongue. They've even changed the traditional Nike logo tab in order to do this, having the Nike and the Gore-Tex logos displayed side by side here. It's not a massive change. You may not even see it most of the time if you've got either pants or laces covering it, but this is the kind of change that I tend to like, just that little subtle nod to something being a little bit different, a little bit elevated compared to the regular version. Oh, one other thing, no signature Air Force One Dubre, that little lace clip that goes at the bottom there. No issue with this personally. I think with the all black look, it's actually slightly cleaner without it. I think by this point you're gonna know if this sneaker is for you or not. They've got the overall experience and look of the regular Air Force One, but with a couple of small performance features which do make a genuine difference in wet weather. They could have done more, but it seems the priority here was to keep these as true to the original Air Force One formula as possible, and it's hard to say that they haven't succeeded in that department. The visual changes are enough to give just a little bit of differentiation, but without putting anyone off that just wants a very simple, a very easy to wear and style shoe that's gonna keep them going all winter. There are definitely more attention-grabbing Gore-Tex shoes out there though, and the price difference, $90 for the regular compared to $150 for these, I would really only recommend them if you have a genuine interest in making 100% use of that water-resistant functionality. Because if we're going by the aesthetic differences alone, there's not really enough to justify the difference. Either go and buy a regular pair of Air Force Ones and save yourself $60, or have a look at some of those other limited Air Force One variants, which will offer you something maybe a little bit more interesting and a bit more differentiated in the looks department. Oh, one other thing in terms of quality and construction of these, it's another area where it's pretty much the same as a regular Air Force One. So you've got glue marks around the foxing, you've got one or two examples of stitching not quite being perfect. It's not terrible, but it's a mass market Nike shoe, so it's par for the course in that respect. That's everything on the Gore-Tex variant of the Air Force One, the 2020 version. There is going to be a high version of these coming out at some point in the future, which I believe has a winterized outsole as well. So if you prefer the more winter-ready stuff, then that one might be more up your street. But anyway, let me know what you think of the low version here. Is this the shoe for you? Do you like the idea of having something that looks very regular, but with that extra imbued performance on the inside there? Or would you prefer something that kind of looks more futuristic and performance ready if you are going to buy a water resistant sneaker like this? Let me know either way, and if you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, because believe me, it is super duper helpful. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week with another video. I told you I was on the warpath with the new content, so this one's coming out a bit early, hopefully, in advance of Sunday. I wanted to, get the stuff out about the sneakers, the hot new stuff, as soon as possible. So, yeah, that's why you might be seeing this on a weekday instead. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you want to catch some more, there's going to be links going up at the top there. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you want to catch some more, there's going to be links going up at the top there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then you should definitely consider doing so, because we've got more technical performance stuff coming up every week. There's going to be more sneaker reviews, there's going to be jackets, there's going to be everything in between. So yeah, stick around, because we've got some cool stuff coming up.